Also, not on this car because they're a later development, are the fins which sit on the floor. The floor is a lot wider. You can see it sticks beyond the wheels to prevent wheel-to-wheel interlocking and the airborne incidents we saw too much of in recent years.
You ready?
Yes.
Okay.
You just get this to work. Another feature, the driver sits lower relative to the roll hoop, is 2 inches further down. There's more space in the cockpit for the driver to make them more comfortable, get more padding. If you may remember last year, Justin Wilson hurt his back after going over a curb. That wouldn't have happened in this car, he'd have had much more protection. Oh, what have I done? The chassis, it's what we call a spec car, in as much as the teams have to run the parts as delivered by Dallara. This is part of the effort to keep costs down. The chassis this year is a lot cheaper than last year. Despite having increased technology, which I'll go into later. Weight is down at 75 pounds. Also, we've reduced the drag. So the engines that we're running on the speedways have less power than the old engines. We can also, to make things simpler for the teams, the same suspension is used on road courses and on speedways. Before, they'd have to change the uprights and wishbones, the whole thing to change from one type of course to the other. That's no longer necessary. The X-Track gearbox, same supply as last year, but a completely new gearbox. Cosworth provide the electronics, again standard for all teams. And we've moved from steel to carbon brakes, and that actually reduces the cost of the team over the course of a year because the brakes last that much longer. Another introduction is a paddle clutch. There's no clutch pedal in the car. The clutch is operated by a lever on the steering wheel. This allows us to introduce an anti-stall feature where the engine control unit can disengage the clutch if the driver's engine speed drops too low. Hopefully that will keep the car running and so reduce the number of red flags or four-course yellows we get during practice or during a race. The engines, they've changed quite a lot. We've got 3 manufacturers this season. Honda, which have been the sole supplier for the past several seasons. We're grateful for Honda's help. They've provided a fantastic product. They've been totally reliable. But that won't get them special treatment. They're going to be treated just like the other 2. Chevrolet, which has a long, successful history with IndyCars. There's a picture there of the old Chevy Ilmor V8. And we've got that combination now. Ilmor are producing their new V6 engine. So that's going to be an exciting combination. And Lotus, the 3rd manufacturer, they first won the IndyCar in the Indy 500 in 1965 and were instrumental in the change from the front engine roadsters to the rear engine Formula cars. So that's going to be an exciting prospect. The engine's a 2.2 litre V6, turbocharged. We've set a minimum weight of 112.5 kilos. It's a compromise between the 3 engines. We switched from using ethanol to Sunoco E85 racing fuel to make it more relevant to the sort of fuel you can buy at many gas stations in North America. We're also allowing direct injection. This is of particular interest to the manufacturers taking part. They can see it as a way of developing systems and learning more about direct injection for their road cars. We've homologating several major parts of the engine, such as cylinder heads, blocks, crankshafts, sumps, to keep costs down, but there will still be development parts allowed on things that normally get thrown away, such as pistons, valves, valve springs. So there will still be some changes going on during the season. The engine is controlled by an ECU from a client supplied by IndyCar that looks after the gear shift, clutch, and data logging and the boost control. We set a rev limit of 12,000 RPM, going up from the 10.3 of the old V8. We've also introduced drive-by-wire. There's no throttle cable. The engine's operated by little motors on the throttle linkages, and it's up to the manufacturers whether they have 1 or 2 motors. But what we're doing, we're providing the software, and then we lock the software in the ECU so the manufacturers can only change the calibrations. So that's where we can avoid problems with traction control and little tricks. Turbocharger, they're supplied by Borg Warner from their EFR, Engineered for Racing range. Each manufacturer had a choice of whether to go single turbo or twin turbo. Honda chose a single, Lotus and Chevrolet both chose twin, but their layouts are all different. Each turbo comes in two different turbine sizes, a small and a large. Normally you'd use the small on road and street courses and save the large ones for super speedways. But the manufacturers are still working on the benefits and losses of the two types. But they're able to switch from one type to the between races, so they're not committed for the whole year. On the turbo, it's now got watercooled bearing housings, ball bearings, and tie alumina turbine wheel for reduced turbo lag. Boost will be varied from track to track, so a road and street course are the highest, the super speedways the least. Like I said, the lower drag of the car enables us to reduce the power of the super speedways, so we only need 1.3 atmospheres of boost. When we get to a road and street course, we should be up to over 1.5 bar. And that means we'll be going from a lot less power than the old car to more power than the old car, depending on the type of track. You'll notice there's no pop-off valve on this car. The ECU controls the boost through how it controls the wastegates. And if a team manages to defeat that by the mechanical setup they use, so that the wastegates can't dump enough boost, then the ECU will introduce a torque reduction strategy so they don't get any benefit from that. So new spec components we've got are the ECU, which is a brand new product developed for this series. We provide the boost sensors as well as the ECU. We're also going to have torque sensors, which will fit from on various cars, changing it from race to race, just to keep an eye on what the performance of the different manufacturers are. And the idea being, if a manufacturer starts to lag behind on performance, they'll be allowed to make changes on some of the fixed parts to catch up. We don't want to hold people back. We want to allow them to catch up. We don't want to punish people for being successful, but we want to keep all manufacturers competitive. There's another thing we haven't got that you've had on the old car is an overtake switch. We wait to see how the racing goes before we introduce that, and if we do, it'll probably be a different setup from the system we've run to date, whereas we might pull something from something we use in Brazil where the driver presses a button and then he gets the overtake so many seconds later, so he just can't respond to another car passing him, just to add to the racing. Also, for those champ car fans, we don't have what's called the 9th butterfly, which in the planning to control the boost, that's gone. It's just normal auto butterflies, one in each port, like a road car engine. We've got no kinetic energy system, energy recovery system on this car as yet. That's a possibility for the future, but as cost is such an important thing of the first year of the series, it's not on this car. Car parts must be used as supplied by Dallara, so all the cars will look, for this year at least, for the same general shape, but having seen various teams' colours, each car is very distinctive. Because of the new suspensions we've introduced, we were going to start off with just a fixed suspension and it would be a fixed wheelbase, but I'm sure you may have heard that there was some issues over the handling on high-speed ovals. To do that, Dallara have introduced a new suspensions to move the weight forward on the car. You can use a combination of the new suspension and the old suspension, so the teams have got the wheelbase to play with, which gives more variables. You can also machine parts on suspension to change the way the suspension works. So what we're trying to encourage is some scope for development by the teams, and hopefully one weekend a team will get it right, next weekend they get it wrong, just to help mix up the field without artificially introducing penalties. Also allowing for the suspension on the dampers inertias, which is a development that was first used in Formula 1 to help the wheel control. Engines have a target life of 1,850 miles, so a team should have only 5 fresh engines in a season. This means we'll have approved engine changes. For example, when an engine gets to its life, it can be changed at any penalty. Unapproved engine changes will be if an engine blows up too early, or the team decides to change an engine for whatever reason before it reaches life, then they'll suffer a 10 grid spot penalty. Manufacturer provide an engine pool, and then at the track we'll pick which engine goes to which team to avoid any favouritism, so the manufacturer's favourite team doesn't necessarily get the best engines. Normally the engines will be similar anyway, apart from the small development they can do, but we want to keep track of that, and again the torque sensors will help us keep on top of that. Then once the engines are going in the car, we'll seal them, so because they last for so many races, the engines will be going back to the team shop, and we don't want anybody doing any work on them that we don't know about when they're back at the shop, so they'll be sealed.